Imagine this. It's the year 1095. Europe is drowning in chaos. Famine, war, and fear grip the land. Kings fight kings, knights kill for coin, and peasants starve under gray skies. Then one man, standing before a trembling crowd in France, changes everything. Pope Urban II, a small figure in white robes, his voice thunders through the cold air. Deus vult, God wills it. Those two words ignite a fire that will consume the world for the next 2 centuries, and that fire will be called the Crusades. But let's rewind a bit. Why did Europe rise up in holy fury? Far away in the east, the city of Jerusalem, the most sacred place on earth, had fallen under the control of the Seljuk Turks, a rising Muslim power. Christian pilgrims who once walked freely to the Holy Land were now being taxed, robbed, or killed along the way. Rumors spread like wildfire. Christ's tomb is in danger. Brothers and sisters are being slaughtered in the East. And in an age where faith was everything, that was enough to summon a storm. So when Pope Urban spoke at the Council of Clermont, tens of thousands fell to their knees, crying and shouting those fateful words, Deus vult, Deus vult. Men wept, women pushed their husbands to go. Criminals were promised forgiveness, knights saw a chance for eternal glory, and peasants just wanted a purpose. It wasn't just a war, it was a holy promise. By the spring of 1096, Europe was on the move. An army of faith, peasants, knights, priests, and thieves, all marching east under the sign of the cross. They called it the People's Crusade, led by a fiery preacher named Peter the Hermit, a man so persuasive, crowds believed his donkey could perform miracles. But faith without discipline is chaos, and chaos came swiftly. As they marched through Europe, hungry and restless, some crusaders turned their holy war against Jewish communities along the Rhine, massacring thousands, a dark omen of what was to come. By the time Peter's mob reached Turkish lands, they were starving and untrained. The Turks surrounded them and slaughtered nearly all. The dream of a peasant army died in the desert sun. But the real crusaders were still coming. Armies of armored knights led by nobles, men like Godfrey of Bouillon, Bohemond of Taranto, Raymond of Toulouse, and Tancred the Fox, all answering the Pope's call. They didn't march as one army. They marched as rivals, bound by faith, suspicion, and ambition. Yet their destination was the same, Jerusalem. Their first target, the Byzantine city of Constantinople, ruled by Emperor Alexius Comnenus. The emperor didn't exactly trust these holy warriors. Imagine watching tens of thousands of armed Westerners, rough, hungry, unpredictable, camping outside your walls claiming to be your allies. Alexius was nervous, so he made them swear an oath. Whatever lands you capture, you will return to me. They nodded, they lied. The Crusaders crossed the Bosporus and entered enemy lands, into the heart of Asia Minor, a land scorched by Turkish arrows and blazing sun. And there, outside the walls of Nicaea, they met their first true test, the Siege of Nicaea. The Turks fought fiercely, their arrows raining like black rain. For weeks, the Crusaders starved, cooked rats, and prayed for strength. Then, in one stunning twist, the Byzantines secretly negotiated with the Turks and took the city for themselves. The Crusaders were furious. Their first victory? Stolen. But the fire of faith burned on. They pressed forward, through the searing plains of Anatolia, across mountains and deserts. Thousands died of thirst, disease, and ambushes. Yet the survivors kept going, until they reached Antioch, the city of iron walls and sacred legends. The siege of Antioch would become one of the most brutal in medieval history. 9 months of starvation. Men boiled leather for food. Horses were eaten. Brothers turned against brothers for scraps. Even the most pious began to doubt. And then, something unbelievable happened. A poor peasant named Peter Bartholomew claimed he had seen a vision. The Holy Lance, the spear that pierced Christ's side, was buried beneath a church in the city. Desperate for hope, they dug and found a rusty spearhead. Was it real? No one knew. But belief, not proof, is what wins wars. The Crusaders charged out of Antioch like men possessed. Outnumbered and exhausted, they crushed the Turkish army that had surrounded them. Antioch was theirs, and their faith reborn. But the final prize still waited: Jerusalem. The march to the Holy City was a nightmare. Out of the hundreds of thousands who began the crusade, only around 12,000 remained, sunburned, hungry, and covered in scars. When they finally saw Jerusalem's walls rise from the horizon, many fell to their knees and wept. But the city would not fall easily. The siege of Jerusalem, 1099, was a storm of steel and faith. The Crusaders built massive wooden towers, dragging them through the sand, arrows whistling through the air. The defenders, Fatimid soldiers, hurled fire and oil, shouting Allahu Akbar from the ramparts. Days turned to weeks. The Crusaders fasted, prayed, and circled the walls barefoot, believing God himself would guide their blades. And then, on July 15th, 1099, they broke through. The gates burst open, and what followed was hell. The Crusaders flooded into Jerusalem, swords flashing, blood running through the streets. Men, women, and children slaughtered in a fury of divine vengeance. Chroniclers say rivers of blood reached the knees of horses. Churches were set ablaze. The stench of death covered the holy city. To them, it was victory. To history, it was a tragedy. When the killing stopped, the Crusaders gathered at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb of Christ, and fell to their knees, weeping and singing hymns. Jerusalem was theirs. The First Crusade had succeeded. Godfrey of Bouillon refused to call himself king. He said, "I will not wear a crown of gold where my Savior wore a crown of thorns." He ruled as defender of the Holy Sepulchre, a holy man in a bloody land. But this victory came with a curse, because what the Crusaders had taken by fire, the East would soon take back by sword. From the ashes of defeat, a new leader would rise, a man whose name would echo through centuries, Salah-ed-Din, Saladin. And when he comes, the world will burn again. They thought the war was over. They thought God was on their side. But the desert remembers, and vengeance was coming. Stay tuned for Part 2, Saladin, the Lion of the East, where the Holy City will bleed once more. If this story gripped you, if you felt the weight of faith, blood, and destiny, hit that like button, subscribe, and join me as we uncover the next chapter of this war that changed history forever. Because history is never just the past, it's the echo of who we still are.